Hi, my name is Reagan Wilson. I'm going to read you my seminar paper for Dr. Serrano's class at Angelo State University, English 6331. So I'm just going to read it to you. So here we go. It's called The Correspondence Among the Life of Edgar Allan Poe and the Telltale Heart. Edgar Allan Poe integrates myopathy in his short stories, as well as in his personal life, as a result of post-war America, in which the marketplace and Edgar Allan Poe's art collided. There was a very antagonistic relationship between commercial writers and the various embodiments of capital in the publishing industry and in the expanding United States economy at this time. The nature of supply and demand during the production of literature and antebellum history was a new and exciting thing during Edgar Allan Poe's life. Edgar Allan Poe responded to this and to society in general with a sense of disgust. Edgar Allan Poe felt that mankind was corrupt. The corruption that Poe felt overflowed into the expanding marketplace, and he had a hard time dealing with that corruption. However, as a man of business on the one side, Poe became a part of this society, producing numerous works that are praised and ridiculed in the present day. The other side of Poe, the dark artist, was the voice in the back of his head, the omniscient, all-seeing narrator he often integrates into his short stories. Edgar Allan Poe tried to use satirical writing to show the ugly face of society to itself. Edgar Allan Poe's work was used as a mirror which would hopefully show mankind its flaws. Edgar Allan Poe wrote anti-democratic myopathy, which reflected the excitement, depression, and corruption of antebellum history, because he was dependent financially on the expanding marketplace, and wrote thus with little accommodation and a lot of resistance, which we can see in The Telltale Heart. Edgar Allan Poe's method for showing mankind, society, and himself this corruption can be seen in his use of the evil eye in The Telltale Heart. Although many critics may disagree, Edgar Allan Poe was, in fact, a man of business. After all, we would not be reading, dissecting, explicating, and learning about his work in present academia if he did not integrate his words and in some way himself into the corrupt society of his time. There is a prominent pattern in many of Edgar Allan Poe's stories that portray him as a man of business. The pattern among his narrators lay somewhere along the lines that, in spite of hatred, there is a dependency for something. Despite Edgar Allan Poe's hatred for corrupt American politics, he recognized that it was this corrupt America that would bring his art and himself into being. In Ego Evil and The Telltale Heart, Magdalene Wing-Chi Key brings up William Friedman's view, another literary critic, of this in The Telltale Heart. William Friedman theorizes a relational view of the old man's I, and I is an I, in spite of his hatred. The narrator is dependent on the old man's eye. Hence, the murder of the evil eye would entail self-murder. The eye that reduces the perceived imaginer to an object must be shut. But since that eye not only diminishes but also determines, in effect creates the victim's identity. To close it is to blind the gaze that glares one into being. This evil gaze can be seen in Edgar Allan Poe's life, as well as in the life of the narrator of The Telltale Heart. The evil gaze that Edgar Allan Poe feels is what creates him, and thus he recognizes the need for business. As a result of this gaze, Edgar Allan Poe found another side of himself as a writer. He created another self in America and within the politics of his time. Uh-oh, did I freeze? I'll read that last sentence just in case I froze on it. As a result of this gaze, Edgar Allan Poe found another side of himself as a writer. He created another self in America and within the politics of his time. The cultural and political happenings of the time are very important, as well as how Edgar Allan Poe reacted to these things, in order to understand him as a man of business. Monica M. Elbert talks about how Edgar Allan Poe fit into the cultural and political time of his day in her article, The Man of the Crowd and the Man Outside the Crowd. I hope I'm not freezing. I might have to pause this. Anyways, okay. So the cultural and political happenings of the time are very important, as well as how Edgar Allan Poe reacted to these things, in order to understand him as a man of business. Monica M. Elbert talks about how Edgar Allan Poe fit into the cultural and political time of his day in her article, The Man of the Crowd and the Man Outside the Crowd, Poe's Narrator and the Democratic Reader. Elbert says on page 16, Poe's cultural barometer, how to reconcile the distinct American vision which Whigs and Democrats perceived, how to combine the Whig platform on law and order with the Democratic battle of cry of liberty and equality, whether to opt for Whig centralization, a new form of businessman patriarchal aristocracy, or for the laissez-faire politics of the common man. Elbert's insight shows that Poe was torn between two political parties and did not know where or how he fit into them. Elbert goes on to say, Poe's distrust of the mob paradoxically made him a man of the crowd, for this sentiment was certainly shared by many contemporary Americans. Hawthorne, a conservative rather than progressive Democrat, had to deal with his own resistance to democratization and to feelings of displacement in a business environment. This is most evident in his defensive statement concerning the mobs of scribbling women in competition with him. Emerson, Whiggish in his inclinations, until even he was converted after Webster's debacle over the slavery issue, often distrusted the herd mentality and its ensuing lack of individuality, though he professed to speak from the heart of every man. Because of these circumstances, Edgar Allan Poe became an individual who wanted to define himself in a complicated democracy, and by doing so he establishes himself as an American Southern writer as well as a man of business. There was more to Edgar Allan Poe than the complicated Southern writer attempting to make his way in a corrupted yet compelling democracy. Edgar Allan Poe was a follower of pure art who resisted the corrupt antebellum democracy of his time. A true artist is constantly teetering along the lines of madness. To stay within this line, the artist is agreeable to the public. He is not fascinating in the ways that Edgar Allan Poe is. He is not watched by the eye of a vulture, as the narrator in The Telltale Heart is. The word vulture represents something bigger than human in this instance, a thing that is constantly changing, flying, and watching the narrator's every thought. The vulture stands outside the narrator and stands for something much bigger, even in Edgar Allan Poe's life. The vulture can also represent Edgar Allan Poe and the narrator's conscience as one, an omniscient, all-seeing, all-knowing phenomenon which will not let him get away with anything. The vulture in this sense can represent the relationship the artist has with art. If the artist is not creating art, it is constantly haunting the artist because it is an obligation for the artist to create. This is Edgar Allan Poe's case. He cannot get away with not creating because it will haunt him like a vulture, even if he does not agree with how he is creating. The narrator in The Telltale Heart says, The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in earth. I heard many things in hell. This is quite an accurate yet subjective definition of art. It goes back to the artist teetering along the lines of madness. Edgar Allan Poe attempts to go over this line and have his art exist pure and naked. Few artists create pure art, living on its own as the human has gone above and beyond all of the senses. Poe expresses insight into this pure art, haunted as it is. Here is something I wrote about the artist's obligation that will perhaps give my readers some insight into Edgar Allan Poe's creation of pure art. The following is my definition and interpretation of art. They write their words with a drunken extravagance, each in his own way. Their muse, the horse that carries a tired warrior, each broken in some way or another, gathering the shards of glass in their backs like a finished pumpkin on Halloween. They scrape the shit that clings, the outcome a steaming pile of shit in his hands. Becoming black, the diseased blood drips from the pile. The smell, the fluidity of it in his hands reminds him of heartache. The remnants of each suicidal concoction flies to the walls, into his legs, clothes, and face as he dangerously washes his hands. His own pen substituted for warm, soapy water. Each with their own contaminated and diseased orbit now flung to the walls, they harmonize. The muscles in his hands strive for